Hi Sparrow! Hey guys, I'm gonna start out this video by giving a warning, a trigger warning. In this video I'm going to be talking about, hi Sparrow, not only pregnancy loss and child loss, which are probably obviously pretty big triggers for some people, but also suicide, depression, self-harm, things like that. So this video is gonna get pretty deep, pretty serious, pretty fast. So I just wanted to put this disclaimer out there, just in case anyone's sensitive to those kind of subjects. I didn't do much to my face today, so please excuse me. This is pretty serious subject matter, and I figured I'll probably end up crying at one point or another in this video. This is a video that I was not expecting to have to make. I don't even know if I'm ready to talk about this yet, but I feel like I have to do this because of healing. I mean, really, that's the best way I can justify doing this. But you read the title of this video, you already know I had a miscarriage in the second trimester. If you don't know much about pregnancy, generally, I think it's like 1 in 5 or 1 in 6 pregnancies end in miscarriage. However, most of those happen even before you know you're pregnant, or at the very least in the first trimester when the baby is still in the embryonic stage. I found out about this miscarriage at my 16-week appointment, which is pretty far into the second trimester. It came as a shock because the general rule of thumb is after the 12-week mark, which is when you start to transfer into the second trimester, your chance for miscarriage is very, very minimal. And that's why a lot of people wait until then to announce a pregnancy. That's why we waited. I had known I was pregnant for like 2.5 months at that point, so we did wait a long time with no sign of issues at all. That's why this whole thing is very shocking and unexpected. So first I'm gonna get into what happened, like medically, and what we know of why this happened. And then I'll get into the way I was feeling, the way I'm feeling now, and how I'm coping with it. But I know I have a lot of people who want answers and are curious to what happened. Basically, it started a few weeks ago actually. Another warning here, this is gonna be a little TMI maybe, but you know, pregnancy isn't the most delicious thing to talk about. It's kind of gross in a lot of ways. If y'all want answers, here we go. So I woke up one morning and I had some brown discharge, and brown means blood, but since it was brown, it's old blood, you know. And it was only a little bit, it was just like mixed in with the rest of my regular discharge. Don't mind my cat. She's probably gonna be here through most of the video. My mom works at my OBGYN, so I wasn't, you know, too concerned, and I called her and I just said, hey, like I have this going on, whenever you get a chance, because she was at work. I said, can you talk to my doctor and see what she says about this? And she's just like, oh, it's, you know, it's just brown blood, like I wouldn't be worried about it. But I did find out that, you know, they went into my ultrasound records and found out that I had subchorionic hemorrhaging, and they were very small hemorrhages, so that's why I didn't know about them, because generally those are things that resolve themselves on their own. Apparently I had them with my daughter too, and those hemorrhages were even bigger and nothing ever came out of those, so they never told me anything about them. Anyway, so they just said, well, you know, it's probably just leftover blood that's just making its way out from there. And I was like, okay. So that made me feel a little bit better, because, you know, my doctor pretty much said, oh, there's no reason to worry. So I was at work that day. In the middle of my shift, I went to the bathroom and there was red blood. And again, not a lot. It wasn't gushing. It was mixed in with my discharge. So I called my mom again and I was freaking out. So if you want some peace of mind, you can come in and, you know, we'll find the heartbeat and all that. It's probably just from the hemorrhaging, blah, blah, blah. So I left work and I went in, and they used the Doppler and they found the heartbeat, and all was good. The heartbeat was there, it was healthy, it was like 155, which is a very normal range. It sounded strong. Well, a few days before that I had had another ultrasound, because there's a test you can get, it's a blood test called the panoramic, something like that. But basically it's for genetic testing. It's an optional test you can have done, and I opted into it because I was so anxious to find out my baby's gender this time around. I didn't want to wait until the anatomy scan at 19-20 weeks that they normally give you. This test can tell you the gender. So I opted into it, and those test results came back inconclusive, which apparently isn't that uncommon. A lot of times it just means there just wasn't enough of the baby's blood in the blood sample they took from me to really get what they needed. So they redrew me, but of course, you know, in the back of my mind I was like, well, something is wrong. that's why it came back inconclusive. Like, so I made an appointment to go have an ultrasound done just for some peace of mind, and we had an ultrasound and the baby was there. Baby had a heartbeat, baby looked healthy. I mean, it was moving. We got pictures, cute little profile pictures of the baby, and I felt so much better after that. I just needed that peace of mind. So we had that ultrasound and stuff and everything looked fine. After all that, after having a little bit of bleeding and hearing the heartbeat that day, you know, I thought everything was okay. About a week later, my husband and I had intercourse, and like a day and a half later I had more bleeding, which they say can happen. It can be caused by irritation to the cervix. Generally, it's safe to have sex while you're pregnant because the baby is protected by the cervix, but sometimes it can cause some bleeding. So I just chalked it up to that. It lasted literally not even a day. It was just one bathroom break. I had a little bit of blood, so I didn't say anything about it because I figured it was just because of the intercourse. And then a few days later, I had my 16-week doctor's appointment, regular checkup. And I went in and they used the Doppler to find the heartbeat. My doctor couldn't find the heartbeat. She said, "Savannah, I'm a little concerned." So she sent me immediately to have an ultrasound. I had to wait maybe 30 minutes and then I was in the ultrasound seat. And luckily, and I feel like this was just meant to happen, my sister was there because my sister's also pregnant. She had an appointment that day too, so she was there. And obviously my mom was there because she was working. I called my husband when, you know, they said there's no heartbeat, and I said, I told him, and he's like, "Do you need me to come down? Do you need me to leave work?" And I was like, "Well, I'm sure it's fine. I'm not sure that like the baby's just hiding or something." And he's like, "I'm leaving, like I'm coming." I was like, "Okay." So he made it right before we were going into the ultrasound. So I had all my family there, and I just remember looking up at the screen and just waiting to see something. And instead I just saw my baby with no heartbeat. That's like an image I'll never get out of my mind, because my baby was there. You know, I saw its little arms and legs, and there was nothing, there was no life. And I just remember I put my hands over my face. I didn't say anything. My sister was hugging me, she was crying, my husband was crying, my mom was crying. But I wasn't crying. I was just sitting there. I must have been in shock. I almost feel like I died at that moment because I had no emotion. I had no feeling at all. It's a really odd experience to just believe that, you know, everything's fine and just go in for a routine and to get this kind of news. The other thing was too is that I got results that day from the second blood draw from that panorama test, and they also came back inconclusive. And this was before we found out there wasn't a heartbeat, and my doctor said, "Well, you know, sometimes these things just happen. It's unusual for it to happen twice." She said Natera, which is the company that does the blood draw, they usually don't recommend drawing for a third time because they're kind of just covering their asses, because if it comes back inconclusive twice, sometimes that can mean, you know, a genetic issue. And she was like, so moving forward, she's like, we'll just have you go for another ultrasound just to ease your mind and stuff. Well, obviously that didn't happen. So my family walked me back into the room with my doctor, and at this point I still wasn't crying. I think I just remember looking at the floor just like numb, and you know, everyone was touching me and everyone was like, you know, rubbing my back and like not saying anything. And at one point I just looked at my doctor and I said, "So what now?" She sat down, she gave me two options. She said, "Well, one thing we can do is give you like drugs in the hospital to induce labor pretty much, so I would deliver the baby." Because I was so far along, I said no. I said I can't do that. Like emotionally I can't do that. And she said, "Well, then the other option is a surgical procedure called a DNC." If you don't know what a DNC is and you're curious, you can go look it up on Google. I don't really want to talk about how the actual procedure is done because it's kind of gruesome. Long story short, without really going into detail, basically they would put me under anesthesia and remove the baby and the contents of my uterus while I was asleep. And I said, that's what I need to do, because emotionally I knew I couldn't deliver a lifeless baby, even though it would be really small, you know. And my doctor just looked at me and, like, I guess because I was still not crying at this point, and she said, "You're gonna go home and this is gonna hit you." And that's all it took. It was right there. I just started crying. I lost my shit, and I just remember asking her, you know what happened? She said, you know, sometimes we just don't know. You know, your 2 tests came back inconclusive. Savannah, I really think that there was probably an underlying issue, because up until that point, the only ultrasound, like the only medical ultrasound I had was at, I think, 8 weeks. So you can't really see much. You pretty much check to see that the pregnancy is viable at that point and make sure everything's growing at the right pace and stuff. Otherwise, the other ultrasound I had that I was talking about earlier wasn't a medical one. It was more of a peace of mind one where you just go in and see the baby, pretty much. So they weren't able to tell me that there was anything wrong at that point. They weren't doctors, you know, they didn't know what to look for, I guess. And, you know, who knows, maybe they saw an abnormality and they just didn't tell me because they're not doctors and they can't, really. She said that they could do some, like, genetic testing after the surgery and stuff, and I just said, oh, what difference is it gonna make, you know? We know there was an issue. My doctor also told me, you know, because I had brought up that I hadn't really had much morning sickness. With my daughter, I was sick all the time. I was so tired that I might as well have been, like, disabled for a while. But with this baby, it was nothing like that. Maybe I had a little bit of nausea here and there, but I never threw up because of my pregnancy. I threw up because I had a stomach bug at one point. I think I talked about that a few videos ago, and my whole family had it, but I never threw up from morning sickness this pregnancy. I was tired, but it was nothing like the way I was with my daughter. And I brought that up to my doctor. I said, well, could that have been a sign? And she said, yeah. I think it's clear now that we have all the pieces kind of fitting together. And my body didn't fight to keep this pregnancy from day one, I don't think. Generally, we have no answers for why this happened. We just know there was an issue and the baby didn't make it. So they scheduled my surgery for not the next day, but the day after. So I went in and they put me under, and next thing I knew, I was in recovery and it was over. The only side effects I've really had were from the anesthesia. I was very, very sore on my whole body. I couldn't move my neck, my abs, my ribs. One of the drugs they use while you're under can cause muscle contractions and then release. And when I woke up, I was really jittery. Muscles were just doing some weird shit. Ended up causing some serious muscle soreness. I have my follow-up appointment with my doctor tomorrow, and they're gonna write me back into work and stuff. I'm healing okay, physically. Emotionally though, as you can tell, this obviously has not been easy. Kind of already talked about how I felt while we were getting the news. That first night was hell. If we're gonna describe my headspace as like weather, most days it's pretty clear, maybe a couple clouds here and there, but this was like Hurricane Katrina. I was not me. I remember at one point just crying to my husband and telling him, like, I can't stop thinking about hurting myself. And that was true. It was literally just like the only thing in my head, because I was blaming myself for this. I kept sitting here thinking, what did I do wrong? Like, was my bath water too hot one night? Did I eat something? Did I overextend myself at work? Did I overextend myself at band practice? Did my daughter or a cat press on my belly too hard? You know, all these thoughts just come flying into your mind, and you kind of start trying to find a reason, and I believed that that reason was me. You know, as a parent, you want to protect your children. And at this point, you know, I would do anything for my daughter. I would take a bullet for her, you know, no question at all. I would do anything for her. But this baby, that was all this baby had. And I felt like I failed it, you know? I felt like I was so out of control. I couldn't protect my baby. That's how it felt. I kind of still feel that way. As a parent, you want to do anything to make sure your children are safe, and I couldn't do that for this baby. So, you know, in times like this, you look for someone to point the finger at, and I had no one but myself to try to blame. And I know now that it wasn't my fault, but that night, you know, I wouldn't let my husband sleep because I needed him to be in my ear just talking. I said, just talk. Just give me something to keep my mind off of this. And eventually I fell asleep, and then I woke back up, and I tried to wake my husband back up to talk me back to sleep, and he's like, I don't know what you want me to do, what you want me to say. Like, I mean, he was obviously struggling with this too. It wasn't just me. It was hard on both of us. I thought a lot about killing myself that night, and I don't want to say that for attention or to sound dramatic. I haven't really talked about this much, but I had a suicide attempt a few years ago, you know, before I had my daughter. And that was my breaking point to get help. And I've spent the last 3-4 years since it happened trying to better myself and get out of that headspace. And all it took was this to take all those steps that I had taken and tear them all back. And I was back at square one. I lost my shit. I was back in that headspace where I just wanted to hurt myself. I didn't feel like I deserved to be alive. And that's really selfish because I have a daughter who needs me, you know. Needless to say, though, those thoughts didn't last very long. I guess what I'm gonna get into now is how I've been coping. And I wanna say before you click off of this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about religion now. And before you click away, I want you to know that this isn't gonna be preachy. This isn't in any way trying to convert anybody. My husband's an atheist. I have many atheist friends. I have no ill will towards people who are non-believers or whatever you want to call it. I just want to share my thought process, and I know a lot of people can get kind of unnerved talking about these kind of things, and I get it from a logical standpoint. I know religion isn't exactly the most logical coping mechanism or life mechanism. Religion is based all on, you know, blind faith pretty much, but I have that blind faith. So I'll get into it here. Of course, I took it out on God at first, and I was talking to him and I was saying, why did you do this to me? Like, what did I do wrong? Why do I deserve this? Why would you take my baby? And I don't ever need a reason to be angry with God, but I was. Like I was saying earlier, I had no one else to point the finger at. I was pointing the finger at myself, but of course, you know, part of it, I was pointing the finger at God. I was like, why did this happen? I need answers. I need someone to blame. And that night, you know, as I was laying there thinking about how much I would rather be dead than deal with the pain I was feeling, and I was just not cursing God, but it was more just like a prayer, kind of just like, why did this happen? And God spoke to me, and I know that sounds crazy to people. I know it does. When I say God spoke to me, it wasn't like a booming voice over a loudspeaker. I think generally when people say God talks to them, it's not like a physical voice. It's kind of a spiritual. It's really hard to explain to someone who's never felt it, but God said to me, he said, talk about it. And I guess that's why I'm here now, because God was right. I need to talk about this. And another thing was that during the day, you know, after we had found out the news, I was researching the procedure, the D&C procedure. Just curious of, you know, what was going on, what to expect and stuff. And I ran into a forum of a lot of other women talking about their experiences with miscarrying in the second trimester. And a lot of these women had lost their babies at 20 weeks, at 24 weeks. The longer that goes, the more difficult it is, but somehow, and I wouldn't say I'm happy that other people have had this experience, because this pain is something that I would never, ever, ever wish on my worst enemy. But I found comfort in knowing that other people were going through this too, that I wasn't the only one. All these other women felt the same way, wanting to blame someone, but having their doctors tell them, you know, you did nothing wrong. This just happens sometimes. Because I think generally when a miscarriage happens, people don't really talk about it much. Honestly, if this had happened early on in my pregnancy, before we announced we had a pregnancy, I probably wouldn't have talked much about it. I'm sure the pain would have still been there, but I can imagine it's a lot worse at this stage, having to have a baby, you know, surgically removed from you because you're too far along to do anything else without going into labor, pretty much. I mean, that's very emotional to have to make that decision. I had some comfort in knowing that I was not alone in this. So when God told me, talk about it, I don't want to say that God made this happen to me so that I could comfort someone else. I thoroughly believe that in the whole opposite thing, you know, you can't have good without evil. You can't have light without dark. I do believe that there are other plays at work in the universe, in the spiritual realms of things. I don't believe that God punishes people in that way. This kind of thing would make someone like me lose their faith, because you kind of instantly think, well, like, I've been faithful to you, God, like, why are you doing this to me? And I don't blame God for this. I did at first because I had no one else to blame, but like I was saying, I think there's other things at play here, and God's job here was to comfort me. He knew that I'm the type of person who, I've been through some shit, and I don't mind being that person that someone comes to talk to for emotional support getting through things, because I've kind of been there. I've been through a lot of shit. If I can help one person, I mean, that's enough for me. I wouldn't say that it makes this experience worth it, because this is not worth, this isn't worth anything. Losing a child, whether it was born or not, is hard. It's the most emotionally trying thing I've ever had to go through. I believe that by talking about this, by making this video, someone somewhere is gonna see this who's been through it, who's having trouble coping. And I'm not saying, oh, you gotta go Christian, you gotta turn to God, but like, there aren't many things that are in our control when it comes to pregnancy. I mean, we can control smoking and, you know, caffeine consumption and things like that, but our bodies are gonna do what our bodies are going to do. I had, you know, that message from God. Some might say it's schizophrenia. It's really not, because it's, like I was saying earlier, it's not like an actual voice, like a booming voice. It's very subtle. The way it makes its impression is like a spiritual level. It's really hard to explain. But at that moment, I apologized to God and I said, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have blamed you. I know this isn't your fault. My husband was saying things like, well, why would your God do this? And I pretty much said, I think it's the reason why cancer exists. I think it's why, you know, HIV and AIDS exists. I don't think God like made these things in order to punish people. I think it's just part of the adversary. There's a battle of good and evil going on at all times, and I think that I'm caught in the crosshairs of it right now. And I think a lot of people might think that sounds crazy, but to me it's very comforting. I feel like I've taken a lot of things for granted in my life. My pregnancy with my daughter was so easy. Not necessarily getting pregnant. I had some fertility issues for a while. We kind of just got lucky with my daughter. We weren't trying, you know, we weren't even expecting to get pregnant, because I was under the assumption that I really couldn't without medical help. And then we got pregnant with her and it was all easy and everything was good. And I guess with this pregnancy, I expected the same thing. It happened really easily, and I just assumed, you know, things are great and this is my life and things are wonderful, but things aren't always wonderful. Things aren't always perfect. It kind of brings a little bit of humility to my life, but also what I can say is that I appreciate my daughter and my husband so much more after going through all this, because it's taught me not to take things for granted. And honestly, maybe it makes me a little more protective over my daughter, and I don't want to be like an overprotective mom. But one thing that my husband said to me though, he said, you know, after going through this, it's gonna all seem worth it when we meet our next baby, because that baby is gonna mean so much more to us when we have it, when we're holding it. And I just have to look forward to that, you know, because, you know, my doctor said, you've had a healthy pregnancy, there's no reason you can't have another one. And at first I wasn't sure, you know, the first few days I was like, I'm never doing this again, I'm never getting pregnant again, like I can't handle this pain and this heartbreak. But it only took a few days for me to kind of realize, like, there's no reason that this experience should hinder me from having a bigger family to love. And if anything, you know, I'm gonna cherish whatever family members we have in the future so much more than I think I ever would have before this. I think that's kind of everything I had to say. I know it's not exactly the happiest of happy endings, but I do want you guys to know that I think I'm coping all right, mostly because of my faith. From a logical standpoint, I've come to realize, you know, Savannah, this is not your fault. You didn't do anything wrong. I think a lot of people might struggle with coming to that conclusion because it's so easy to blame yourself, but I know this isn't my fault and I'm not being punished for anything. I think that's the biggest thing I want people to get out of this, is that whether you've been through this or, you know, you may be through something like this in the future, you have to know this is not your fault. Once my body is healed and we're able to, we plan on trying again. I will probably not be so vocal about pregnancy next time until I really can't not be anymore. I don't know, we'll see. We'll have to see where the wind takes us, you know. But I do believe that in the future we'll have our family the way it's supposed to be. It's just hard being at this point right now and not seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, but I find comfort in knowing that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. I just can't see it yet. I'm sorry that this is so long and emotional, but I hope that maybe one person found some help in watching this video. Hold on to those you love, humble yourself a little bit, and realize that you can take things for granted really easily. We're not guaranteed anything in life, so just love the ones you have now. Remind yourself how lucky you are to have the things you have. That's it. Hopefully next week we'll have a happier video. But thanks for watching, and thanks for all the love. Thanks for everyone who's reached out and, you know, made sure I was okay. Because I am, and I will be. So, alright. I love you guys so much. Thank you for watching. Bye.